All right, this is Landry.audio. I hope that you're having a good day today. And if you're not, maybe we can make it just a little bit better for you. Today is episode 58 with MMA pioneer Monty Cox. Monty's not actually a fighter. He is a manager and promoter who has been associated with the early MMA landscape. I want to say dating back to the mid 90s, and we'll give him a chance to clarify that for us. So while we get into this, if you can remember to like, subscribe, and follow us, which helps us develop cultivate an audience here. Monty is, I believe he's in Iowa in the United States, and I am in the great city of Newcastle, Australia, where we are in the daytime. He's in night. We're going into summer, and I think they're going into their very cold winter over there. So how are you on that side of the planet today, Monty?
All good. I actually now live in Detroit.
Detroit. Okay. Well, the
Yeah,
weather
I,
probably hasn't improved at all then.
about the same. I'm one of those guys. I moved from bad to worse, but I've lived here for about 4.5 years now. After 30 years in Iowa.
How is that city doing? Again, I can only read things from afar over here, but I don't hear a lot of kind things about Detroit these days ever since the Ford left 20 years ago, and it seems
Yeah,
seems to be a lot of bad, dangerous neighborhoods over there at the moment.
there are some, but I'll tell you, it's no Chicago.
Hmm.
We don't have any of those kind of deaths and stuff. I think the mayor of Detroit is doing a really good job. I mean, there's no soft on crime in Detroit.
Yeah.
You get hit, you go to jail. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts, and so we you don't see any of these crazy things where a guy attempts murder on somebody and then they let him out the same day.
Yeah.
That's not, we're not like that here, and that's in the suburbs. It's pretty nice. It's kind of like Chicago. My two of my kids live in Chicago, and they say as long as you stay in your own area and the nicer areas, it's a great city.
Okay. Cool.
But I don't know. I'm scared for them all the time.
All right. So as I mentioned, for people that don't know you, I started training and getting into this stuff. I want to say around 2003. So that kind of puts me in the time frame of starting to watch the UFCs around UFC 44, I think is when I became big after getting bootleg Pride and K1 tapes. So that is really the heyday, and I think why I remember your name so much is because that's when Miletich was running the show. And so, Matt Hughes, it was like a staple of those cards back then. But for people that don't know you, I mean, you started as a journalist who just through happenstance happened to kind of get into this at the time very burgeoning MMA world.
Yeah. I was 18 years. I was a newspaper editor, and I was the editor of the Quad City Times, pretty good sized paper from Lee Enterprises. And things were going good. I was kind of on the way up, and one day I got a call, and someone called in, and one of the reporters goes, "Hey, Monty, we got a fight call." And I handled all the boxing and all that stuff with Michael Nunn and those guys that were there. And so I took the call, and the guy tells me we got a local guy that's going to go to Chicago, and he's going to fight in this show with no weight limits, no time limits, no rules. And I go, stop. This is stupid. What are you talking about? At the time I had not seen a UFC. There
Mm.
had been three of them, but I missed it. And so
So this is
uh,
94 then by then, 94, 95 roughly?
this was 95,
95. Okay.
and so I said, give me this guy's number. So I call him up, and before I can even say anything, he goes, stop. He goes, before you do a hatchet job on us, come down to the gym and let me show you what we're doing. So I'm in. So I go to the gym, and I see wrestling. I'm in Iowa. Everyone, your
Sure.
paper boy wrestles. I saw boxing, which I'm familiar with, and then he started showing me jujitsu, and to me, that I always say I thought it was like voodoo. I'd never been held in those kind of submission holds and joint locks, and it hurt.
Okay, so
I
you're on
mean,
the mats.
they were
They're giving you a
they were
lesson.
showing me
Yeah.
why this, why you would tap.
Okay.
And so I go, all right. I go, I'm hooked. This is bizarre. And the guy says, now imagine two guys that train in all of these aspects fighting each other with all this knowledge. And I go, I got to go to Chicago with you. I got to see this now.
Mm.
And go to Chicago, and the local guy runs over everybody, just steamrolls everybody. And I was like, holy cow. And there were 3,000 people in a 2,000 capacity venue. It was people hanging on top of each other. Never seen stuff like it, you know. And that guy was Pat Miletich.
Okay.
And you know, I'm writing a book, and in my book I say I left St. Andrew's Gym with two thoughts: is this going to be the next big thing in the sport, and is Pat Miletich the best guy in the world? Those
Okay.
are my two thoughts, and yes and yes, as it turned out. But on the way home, Pat is very convincing. He doesn't take no for an answer, and he's stronger than me. So
All right.
he's like, we're gonna do a show. We're gonna promote a show in the Quad Cities. I go, I don't know anything about this sport. I just saw it for the first time. Yeah. You're gonna do it. You're a promoter, right? And I was promoting boxing.
Okay.
And I go, yeah, but I don't know this. He goes, you're a promoter. You're going to do it. He goes, it's going to be huge. And before we got back to the Quad Cities, I had agreed, and we're going to do this thing. So I set up the biggest arena. We had a brand new arena on the Illinois side of the Quad Cities, held 11,000, and we played this as a big deal. Everybody knew Pat. Everybody. I mean, hell, he'd beaten up about everybody.
Right.
You know. And I had one guy, I asked him about Pat, and I go, what do you know, where does this guy train and stuff? And he goes, well, you know, he trains a lot of different things, but mostly he trains in bars. I mean, you know, he's had a lot of bar fights. And he said, everyone knows he's the toughest guy in town. So we put this thing on. I drew 8,000 people for my first show. Never done bigger in the States.
Okay.
And you know, I made 2 years salary of a newspaper editor in one weekend. All of a sudden I didn't want to be a newspaper guy anymore. I think this thing is going places. And I needed like 3 months, maybe 2 months before I was fully vested in my 401k and everything. So I wasn't much good to the newspaper at that point. I couldn't care less about the paper.
Yeah.
I just wanted to work on my next show. And that, you know, that was the beginning. And man, what a crazy thing, you know.
Right.
I mean,
So I'm going to try to segment this into time periods kind of as we move around because you're there. So I guess maybe you weren't privy, or if you're just finding out about this, did Pat ever explain to you how he's finding out about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Because I can't imagine, if we're talking UFC 3, that the Gracies have spread continentally through the US now. So do you know how he's sort of finding out about this?
yeah, he went to a they were already, he and Mark Hansen, he's a cop. He's a big heavyweight, tough guy. The two of them were training partners.
Okay.
And they heard about this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu seminar in Chicago, and they went to it. And it was great. I'm not sure. It wasn't Renzo Gracie. I'm not sure who it was, but whoever ran it, they came back with, you know, if they were fired up going out there, now they're fired up because they saw this. They saw the future. That I got to learn this. You know, Mark saying, as a cop, I got to know this. And Pat's just going like, oh, this is it. You know, this is everything I've ever wanted. So that's how they got started.
And I guess before we start talking, because initially we're talking about Pat, he's sort of the linchpin to what grows out of there. But I guess before we talk about him specifically, I'll take it back because you mentioned Iowa, and I've had these conversations with a few interviewees now. What is it about Iowa where wrestling is like the thing? It's like it's Iran and it's Iowa.
Well, I mean, what I think, the University of Iowa won 21 straight Big Ten championships, and and they have more wrestling championships. I mean, by far, Dan Gable, all this history. It's just something in Iowa, there are no pro sports. There are none. I mean, no baseball, no football, no basketball and stuff. There's very few ice hockey rinks at all. And so this is something that they got into. And I went to an Iowa wrestling meet outdoors that drew 43,000 people.
Really?
To watch people in singlets roll around on each other. I mean, and I come from Indiana. That's where I grew up. Wrestling was a punishment. If you couldn't shoot a basketball, they made you wear a singlet and go out and roll with other men. That's what Indiana does. Iowa, it doesn't matter if you don't want to play basketball. You only do that if you can't wrestle. It's a total turnaround. Yeah, you notice, I don't have the cauliflower ear. I'm the outcast in Iowa. I mean, mothers have cauliflower ear.
I use that in future. I like that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, like, as I said, I think it's really Pat that becomes the center of what's going on around that time. I mean, you can probably fill in the details, but as I said, by the time that I'm starting to watch this at around 2003, the Militich fighting camp is already, it's the first kind of super camp that we've ever seen. And, over time that gets superseded by, I guess Lions Den is the first.
Lions Den was about the same thing.
Because that's Bolander, Trey Telligman, Vernon White.
We got to see them all, all together. And that was back when Bob Shamrock was still kind of involved too. And Ken and Frank were there. They were getting along then. And they were impressive. They'd show up at UFCs and stuff wearing fatigues. And Telligman would say, "Don't hate us because we're beautiful," and stuff like that. And we would all look at each other and go, we don't want to become that. Don't let that happen to us. We want to be a team, but we don't want to act like we're better than everybody else. We're more, big difference between California and Midwest. Midwest is a little more relaxed. But yeah, we started building, and the funny thing was, there were not many shows going on. Maybe 5 other shows in the country. So when I would put on a show, I'd have people come from 3 states or around. I mean, because it's your only chance. And my commercials would say, "You've seen it on pay-per-view, now see it live." And that was the big deal. Live, we're going to see it live. And I was drawing 5, 6. I was out drawing the UFC, sometimes triple, quadruple them. I'm drawing 6,000, 7,000, 5,000. They're drawing 1,500 and stuff. And the difference is I used locals. Mine were, I had Militich in Davenport, but when I went out to Des Moines, I had to get Des Moines guys. And when I went somewhere else, and I started circling, and I was the first to do a show in Wisconsin, the first to do a show in Ohio, the first to do, I mean, there was no one doing them. I'm just picking out arenas and filling places. It was incredible. I mean, people were loving it.
When you start early promoting like that, is it because they're local athletes, or is the fact that, like, I mean, if you look at local promotions, typically the fighter will take in a pack of like 50 tickets to his gym. So is that what's really pushing it? Is their sort of friendship and family?
Not back then.
Right.
Back then, it was that people would say, "We got cage fighting. Cage fighting's coming to town." Okay. Now it's like, Militich is fighting, Hughes is fighting. It's a whole different deal now. Back then, like I said, they didn't get a chance to see it anywhere else. And so I started doing, I've done over 600 shows. So it's I mean, I was doing 40, 45 a year. And I was doing all kinds of different shows. Extreme Challenge was my big one. I'd have 10, 12 guys on each show that ended up in the UFC.
Are those the Ralph Gracie ones, or was that Extreme Combat?
No, that's Extreme Fighting that Peretti did.
Okay, Peretti.
Mine's Extreme Challenge.
Okay.
I stole a little,
Well,
so.
it was pretty incestuous back then. It's any sort of variant of UFC that you could find existed to some degree.
Yeah, my company name that I've had since '95 is Ultimate Productions.
Yeah.
And I remember at one time Meyerowitz saying, we could sue you for that. And I go, how can you buy a word? How can you own a word? That's
Right.
I mean, there's ultimates everywhere. And he left me alone. We got along pretty well, Meyerowitz and I. But
So, sorry.
real quick, so while all that's going on, I'm just going from place to place to place to place. We're adding to my resume of fighters. Um, they would show up, and Pat and I would say, "Find a guy that's good." We'd say, "You need to move to Iowa. You need
Mm,
to come train at Pat's." So some guys would they thought it was a twofer. They thought if we move to Iowa, we'll train with Pat and get managed by Monty.
right.
And for the most part, it happened, but it wasn't a sure thing. I had to like them, and stuff. And we had guys that moved just to be managed by me, and that would add guys to Pat's regiment. I mean, the way we found guys were the shows.
Mm,
That's where Jeremy Horn and all these guys came from. Matt Hughes, all fighting on my shows, and then you talk them into moving to Iowa, and after a while, we had a hell of a team. I mean, it
well,
was scary.
I a couple of years ago, I spoke with Rich Franklin. I think virtually like the weekend after he was nominated for the UFC Hall of Fame, and I'm sure he recounted the story that you pretty much came up to him after one of his fights and said, "Hey, like I'd like to help you." And I think if I think he said he didn't even take it seriously because he didn't know where it would go. He's just like some guy, like as though this isn't going to go anywhere. This guy's not going to make me any
Yeah,
money. I don't take this seriously at all.
yeah. He said in the book he said he goes it wasn't until a month or so later, and when he started looking back on it, goes and he's going, I have the number one manager in the world at the time offering to help me, and I'll say, let me get back to you. And the
Yeah.
way it happened was I was already getting him fights. I got him a fight against Aaron Brink in King of the Cage, and so I fly out with him. I see this great potential in him, and he he's sick as a dog. I go into his room the day before, and I mean he's got 104-degree temperature. He's sweating, and I go, look, this is done.
Mm,
I'm calling this off. And he goes, no, no, no. He goes, and he says, I'd never been flown anywhere to fight before. And I never, I'm seeing things I didn't think I'd get to see. He goes, I felt like I had to fight. And I wasn't managing him at the time, or he wouldn't have fought. And he went ahead and did it. And afterwards, I'm looking, I come into his room and I go, well, you're obviously too stupid to manage yourself. I go, that's obvious. I mean, there's no arguing it. So
mm.
I'm gonna have to manage it because you can't, do it. And I kind of caught him off guard and stuff. But um, a month later or so, where we get started, and boy, we didn't waste any time. We just started, boom, boom. I was connected, to everybody. By then I was connected to the WFA, to Extreme Fighting, King of the Cage, Hook and Shoot. I mean, UFC, and then I got connected with Japan. I was the
Mm.
first to start taking guys to rings because they turned into from pro wrestling into MMA.
All right, don't
And
get ahead of
man,
me here.
it's yeah.
Don't get ahead of me here.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I'm saying, but that's why pretty soon I'm getting 7, 10 calls a week. Fighters want me. Would you manage me? Can you do this?
Mm,
And at first I kept it to about 20 guys that were all training right there. I saw them every day, and that was easier.
yeah.
But
Okay.
gradually, I get people. I bring in a Franklin from Cincinnati. I bring in a Dave Monet from Minneapolis. And I started, Sean Shirk from Minneapolis. And pretty soon, I mean, and all these guys fought in my shows. I saw them, I see the talent, and I, handpicked who I wanted to bring in.
I'll go into those guys. I just want to take a segue, Ellen, because you mentioned his name. Aaron Brink is not a name that I've heard in many, many years. And again, trying to track, I think like a
He
lot of
called
these
me
guys.
yesterday.
So he's still around because I'm sure I heard a rumor that he had committed suicide because he got into drugs and pornography and a few other things back then, didn't he, for a while?
Yeah, his nickname was Dick Delaware.
That's right. Okay,
I,
that's
I'm lo- I'm loaded with facts that mean that I should just forget.
all right.
But he's calling me, wants to trying to see if I'll help him get in the bare knuckle. That's
All
so
right.
he's
Okay.
been calling me. But yeah, Aaron was he started fighting for me early
Yeah.
and in tournaments and stuff. And I remember a guy calling me and saying, Monty, turn on CNN. And I turn on CNN and they're showing a guy swimming from Mexico across the Gulf to the US with a bag of drugs on his back. And pretty soon they say, we're told that this is Aaron Brink. I'm like, what? And the
And he's calling
guy's
you just
got
to get some credit for doing so.
he's got some stories, I'm
Mm,
sure.
okay.
So
So at the time when you're pulling these guys in, and I guess geographically, if you don't know much, like I mean, I guess for someone like me, I'd still kind of consider that the Midwest when you're talking about like
it is.
Minneapolis and all these sorts of
Yep.
areas. So back then, what's sort of the status of what's going on? So if you're bringing in guys like Shirk, Mene, Franklin, are they moving to Militich's then and then trying to find work locally, or are they going, okay, that's it, we're just going to fight for a few grand to fight and turn that into a full-time living already at that point in time?
Actually, those guys you mentioned, none of them moved there. They were all within driving distance, 5 hours,
Right.
and so they would come and train 3 or 4 days and not come back for 2 weeks, and then
Would
come
they
and
stay or would
train.
they commute back and forth daily to do this?
No, they'd stay.
Right. Okay.
We'd find places for them and all that.
Okay.
Jeremy Horn moved, Jens Pulver moved, Tim Sylvia moved, those guys all moved. From out of our local stable, we had Robbie Lawler and McFedries and
That's right.
and Jason Black, who at one time was 21-0. They were all local guys that just started. It became a big deal, and they jumped in.
Okay.
I mean, the Thursday night sparring nights in that gym when they were on top were better than any show. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got world champion going against world champion against, the whole gym is full of superstars.
Well, you're
Pretty
saying
fun to watch.
on another podcast, it wasn't exactly sparring. It was pretty much you're watching fights play out in front of your eyes.
There were a lot of people getting knocked out, and it was so much testosterone in that room you could barely walk through it. It was alpha male central. I mean, and it was something.
And so around this time period, because I think most people now, most of the websites will report on how much money guys are making. So we know that the top athletes can command 6-figure up to $1 million paychecks plus cuts of pay-per-view, etc. But the undercard, there's still a lot of fighters that might get like $2,500 to show, $2,500 to win.
Well, not now.
You don't think, not even on the low undercards of
No.
some of the stuff? No, it's much higher than
No.
that, is it?
Okay. Minimum UFC minimum is 12 and 12.
12
That's
and 12.
the minimum.
Okay. So back then,
and plus you pick up 2,500 for your first UFC for the clothing sponsor, and then you have a chance to win 50,000. I mean, for some of the guys that are getting into the UFC now that are only 3-0 and 4-0, I mean, the money's really good.
Okay. So
back when it first started, just to say, I put a guy in one time for 500 and 500.
That's where I was going to get to. I'm saying because some of these guys are already deciding to make a career out of this. And again, I remember this conversation with Rich. I said, where did you think this would take you? Because there wasn't opportunity back then. He just said, I just kind of went with it and hoped for the best. So, when we talk about these guys around that period in these sort of UFC's 20s and UFC 30s, what kind of paychecks were the household names getting back then?
I think the biggest payday Pat ever got was 20 and 20.
Right. Okay.
And he defended his title 6 times or 7 times.
And that would have been Newton or something like that I might be thinking of around
Yeah.
that time, roughly. All right. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, well, that was before Carlos took it from him. It was all the other guys, coming up. He fought in Japan. Stuff like that. All those Pereira, a lot of Brazilians,
Yeah.
Mikey Burnett, and all that stuff.
I haven't heard that name in forever. You're bringing up all these guys that I only really ever saw in what was Aaron Brink. They were in Cage. The
King of the
Cage,
Cage.
King of the Cage. Yeah, all these guys that spent virtually their
Terry
entire careers
Trebilcock.
fighting out of there. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so
Terry's one of my better friends. He and I get along. He just sold it, but he had a house right out here about 40 minutes from me. Lives in California, but he grew up in Michigan.
Okay.
So we've gone golfing here and gone out to eat and stuff. We've always gotten along really well.
Okay. So how do we move into this space? Because for people that might be younger now, it seems pretty easy that you might just hop on Instagram or Twitter and message someone and say, how about some fights in Japan? How do you start creating this network, or how are people finding out about you, prior to, because virtually UFC still on pay-per-view. I see you got to buy that through your cable provider. How are people finding out about you, and what's happening in the media at this point in time?
Well, the Full Contact Fighter magazine became really big, newspaper. Okay. Joe Gold running that. And that was, when he would come out, everything in there is about a month old. But that's new for MMA at that time.
Yeah.
It's funny, when I was starting to write my book, I went back and I was writing down records. Everyone says, well, what was Matt Hughes's record at this time? And you know what? Back then, we didn't keep track. We kept track of wins and losses, but it didn't matter. We didn't look at it. I didn't know that Matt was 22-1 and has only lost to Hallman. I didn't know all my guys were just these ridiculous records. But they all fought in my shows, built themselves up, I would pick all the opponents and stuff. I built their records and then got them in the UFC. And I waited until I thought they were ready. UFC called 3 times for Tim Sylvia, and I just didn't think he was ready. And I didn't want to put someone. The goal wasn't to get a guy in the UFC. The goal is to get a guy in there who can make a living, who could go in there and win and win and win. Those are the guys that I wanted to put in. And, I ended up with 10 champs doing it that way. But a lot of people were in a rush to get it in, to get guys in. And, I real quick, I used to say back then, people would say, what do you need to be a good manager? And I always said, if I was a talented guy and I was looking for a manager, I would ask that person, give me an example of a guy who is where I am right now and what you did for him. Tell me how you took him from this level to that level, all the way to UFC champion. And I said, if they can't tell you that, doesn't mean that they're not a good manager. It just means they're not experienced, and those were the things that you needed back then. You needed to understand, you had to be able to look at opponents and kind of visualize if your guy was going to win or not. You know what I mean?
Visualize.
Now, well, that's how I do it. I get to, and I see it, and I think it, and I kind of in my mind go through how this is going to go. And although I wasn't a good fighter or anything, I think I was pretty good at that I could figure it out. And I can't tell you how many times really good fighters would say, Monty, I can't believe you took this fight. This is it's a terrible fight. It's a terrible fight. And my guy'd win in a minute. And I'd
Right.
say,
Okay.
you do the fighting, I'll do the thinking. That's what that was my saying to all the fighters. You train, you fight, I think. Then we're going to be successful.
So how does rings come along? Because I think, as you mentioned, rings and even Shudo, that they were originally, and Pancrase was based in fixed fights before they get into reality stuff. And when I think of rings, I immediately think of, that's where Fedor came out of, and I think Ricardo Arona came out of rings as well at
Oh
the time,
yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. So
Everybody fought. Everybody fought in rings. I mean, all the top guys, the Dan Hendersons, the Randy Coutures. They're all there.
yeah, because
They're
he
all
dropped to Enson Inoue, I think, out there before he came back to
yeah.
the
They're
UFC.
just. I mean, I was there. I was putting 4 and 5 guys in a show. I was out there every single show watching all these great fighters and stuff.
And how does that work? Can you give me some insights into Japan? Because Japan seems to have a real affinity for sort of like American tough guys coming in, and I guess working
They
in that
sure did
environment.
back then.
Okay.
It's not so much now,
Yeah.
but they did back then. And um, what happened for me is my guys started becoming UFC champs and winning in the UFC. And Japan was, even though they had pride, they were watching the UFC pretty closely,
All right.
how it was doing, the stars they were making. And Motoko Yoshida, who was their matchmaker for rings, and has been my partner now for 20 years. Still, we're very close. And she called me and said, we would like to get Matt Hughes, or we would like to get Jeremy Horn. And so I would go out there with a couple of guys and we'd talk, and I would say, hey, I have a whole team of these great fighters who would all love to come to Japan. How can we set this up? And she introduced me to Maeda, who was the owner, and Maida, I guess. And I told him, if you're going to do this, you can't have fake fights. Can't do it. Even if it's between 2 Japanese wrestlers that you're throwing in, if once the U.S. starts watching this and stuff, those 2 things got to be apart. And he agreed. And then we started doing a lot of things together. He would call me for thoughts, ideas. He flew me out there before to judge for him, just so
Right.
we could get out there to talk.
Okay.
He flew Jeremy Horn and I out there when Jeremy testified at his trial, and when he hit another guy at another promoter at one of the
Right.
shows, and we went out. He flew us out to testify, but that's where it started. And then Shudo starts calling more, and then Sengoku was there for a while, and Pride, and that's how it started. They knew fighters, but they didn't know a lot of managers back then.
Right. Okay.
And I slid right in, and I've never been hesitant to go up and talk and try to find, a connection.
Mm.
And it worked really well. For a while, I ran Rings USA. It was a show I did a 32-man tournament in Rings USA.
Right.
And I did an 8-man in Des Moines, an 8-man in Utah, and an 8-man out in Hawaii. And then all this stuff was filmed, sent back to Japan, and put on TV. So I had my own TV show for a little while, Rings USA.
Yeah. Right.
And stuff. That's stuff people don't know. No one knows that, really.
Okay. And was there, I guess the way that we would compare organizations out here, was there much of a difference, I guess, in how the organizations were run and how they treated fighters when you compare sort of Pancrase, Shudo, and Rings back then?
Well, Pancrase and Shudo were smaller shows. They didn't draw real well. So, guys were getting $1,000, maybe 2. That was about it. Rings was different. Rings was an established. They took their wrestling crew and moved over into MMA. They also
Really?
took their TV deal. They had a
Okay.
TV deal with TV Tokyo that paid him. He got paid $1 million a fight to put it on. You can bring a lot of good fighters over back then for $1 million a fight. $1 million a event.
I didn't realize Rings was bigger than the other two because it's of the
Way
three,
bigger.
I know less of it. Okay.
Yeah, way
What
bigger. They had the TV deal.
one of the things I guess we'll kind of move. I'm curious about Japanese MMA because I'm big on that Pride era, but there's quite a few videos that have been coming out now where they look sort of historically at the origins of this sport, and there seems to be, because you know this, like I joined a BJJ gym, did BJJ and MMA for a lot of years, and this catch wrestling revolution seems to have caught on as getting big again. And some of these explanation videos that I'm watching now is they're going, somehow catch wrestling got lost in the mix. But it's really out of catch wrestling that we got professional wrestling, and through professional wrestling is how we got the original MMA organizations. And I'm noticing that we're now, again, I don't know if it's true, but there seems to be this revisionist history now that it's not really the Gracie's 93 in the UFC. It's actually catch wrestling and its origins and how it penetrated the world of Japanese pro wrestling. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you have any sort of
I
opinions
mean,
on that?
yeah. I mean, I see it. I think they did in Japan. Japan wouldn't say that their events, their promotions came from Art Davie. You
Yeah, of
know,
course. But they
but
mentioned
but
Carl
but
Gott spending all this time
right.
with the stables, I guess as they would call them back then.
Yeah, there definitely was that. It just never got publicity. You just didn't hear about it. I mean, like that's the thing that Meyerowitz and Davey and those guys did is they brought it out and I mean they put a lot of money in it and
Hmm.
they boom, here it is. And it caught. No one was spending millions of dollars to promote catch wrestling. It was just one of those things that it was there amongst the underground kind of knew it, but I don't think it was a main
Sorry,
a
I
main
guess I'm probably not explaining myself well. I guess what I'm saying is that these sort of back channel videos that go over the history now, they're sort of talking about how catch was the original originator to MMA, because for Westerners like me, to me, it's UFC 1 is the start of all this. And now that I know a
right.
little bit more about this, it's like, oh, well, you actually had Hickson fighting in Coliseum, and previous to Coliseum, you had Pancrase Shudo. So
Yeah.
I guess it was there, is I guess in your opinion, an established MMA scene in Japan prior to UFC 1, or did the UFC influence all these other organizations and they kind of started moving towards this realistic fighting at the same time from
I
93
think
onwards?
now again, now you're when you go back to those Hickson and those Gracie in action
Yeah.
tapes and stuff like that, you predate me because I was not a martial artist. I was a boxer,
Yep.
so I didn't know Hickson was doing those things. But my opinion is, um, they certainly had the beginnings of stuff, but it was the UFC that really put it together as far as discipline against discipline against discipline. As far as those guys were doing, they were all catch wrestling.
Mm.
They didn't want everyone to be the same in the start of the UFC. They wanted a sumo guy against a
The
Greco-Roman
spectacle that
wrestler.
it was designed to show off Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, wasn't it?
Of course.
Yeah.
But it also was, I mean, I can remember watching those and when they would come out with the parade of athletes and you'd look at them and you got like chemo with a big cross on his and you'd look at them all and you're like, oh man, that guy's got to be good. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you didn't know anything about him.
Yeah.
Now you know everything about everybody. You say, oh, look at this guy. Yeah, last week he was over it. You know everything.
Yeah.
You didn't know anything then. You just went, oh, look at that guy. Look at that dude. That guy's got to be good. And I can remember watching the first one I saw was Severn and Gracie in the final, and I think that's 4.
Okay.
And Severn is on top of Gracie, and I'm watching this going, this wrestler beating the tar out of this, and then it was over, and I'm like, what? What happened? And these guys are trying to explain to me that how he triangle choked him, or I think it was a triangle,
Yeah,
and
they're in the
and
cage and he's
and
throwing.
it,
They're in there for he's throwing these heavy, slow punches and then just gets caught. Yeah,
yeah, and you're thinking you got a 260-pound Olympic alternate wrestler on you. You ain't getting out from under him.
yeah.
So what do you? And there's no time limits. I mean, maybe back then they did the 25-minute or
I
something.
thought they were
I think
30
for
minutes or
TV,
something like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
for TV they did it. But I'm like, I mean, this is a no brainer. This dude's just going to pound on him and then it was done. And that really just got me. I was like, is this real? And
mm,
that's, what got me interested. The surprising finishes and the dramatic turnarounds where one guy's whipping the other and it goes to the ground and the other guy's whipping him, but they get back up and it's going, man, that was the greatest thing ever to,
yeah.
to, to watch. You never knew who was going to win. I mean, it didn't matter. You did not know who was going to win.
Well, it hasn't even gone away. The last two UFCs we've had what fourth and fifth round turnarounds as well. So it's still,
Yeah.
I say the same thing. I try to explain to everyone. It goes, what do you, because you can you can choose anything that you think you're best at and then go out and use that of what you want to do. I don't think because having especially with the new age of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu where they're all just like leg lockers, I go, well, there's not a lot of diversity in it anymore for what you're doing compared to if you can suddenly kick the guy in the head or something along those lines.
Yeah. Well, and that's why Pat was so successful. I always credit him as one of the first to get to be the all around guy. He
Mm,
could wrestled in college. He could strike, good striker, and he learned jujitsu. So at his weight, he was the first one. He would go out there and he'd look at the opponent, and how am I going to beat this guy? Okay, I'm fighting Townsend Saunders, Olympic wrestler. I got to keep him on his feet, or I got to sweep him, get on top, and submit him. Yeah,
and
I
that's
mean, he could pick his way.
more so what I had meant when I talked about Miletich fighting systems, because Lions Den was still, we didn't really have titles or divisions or even time limits back then. But under Miletich, we had, you had a mentor, then you had a wrestler and Matt, you had a BJJ guy and Jeremy, you had a kickboxer and Rich, and I don't know, you can call Tim whatever you want. Pulver was more of a boxer style. You had all these guys that were bringing their attributes to build a team, and I think that's probably a little bit different to Lions Den, which would have, I guess, maybe happened a decade earlier, roughly, approximately then.
Yeah, maybe maybe as little as 6 years, because I was already in the business when we used to have to sneak into the after fight parties because we were nobodies, you
Right.
know.
Okay.
Great story. This is back in the period we're talking about in the 20s. Pat, and maybe it was earlier. It was it's where Tank Abbott smashed. Was it Newell or whoever?
Oh,
Or
the big guy.
against the cage and Netmark. No,
Oh, and
Netmark.
folded him
Netmark.
like laundry against the
Yeah, he
cage.
just hung on the
Yeah.
cage.
Yeah.
Well, Pat and I, we decided back then they didn't have lightweights, right? I mean, it was just heavyweights. So Pat was probably 9-0 at the time, and we flew to Atlanta, took a rental car. We go to the show, we buy tickets. We're sitting up in a barn, up in the bleachers, and watching everything. And Pat looks over and he goes, or I took him first, and I said, "I'm going to get you in the UFC one day. I'm gonna do it because I already agreed to manage him, but I wouldn't take any money until I got him in the UFC.
Okay.
But I go, I'm going to do it." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, and you're going to promote it. That's how it's going to go. And we're like, yeah, here's two idiots sitting up in the thing. Well, we got to UFC 25, 26 in Cedar Rapids, and Meyerowitz hired me as the site promoter. I made the arena deal, the hotel deal, set it up, picked a lot of helped with the opponents. We had 8 fights, and I had 7 of my guys in there.
Yeah.
But those were profitable. Can you imagine now? I mean, my gosh, I'd have a nicer place. Your your office is all you have to have someone clean your office.
Yeah.
Mine, you can see mine. No one wants to come to my office, you know.
It's such it's such a different time, and I guess you might be a little bit bitter if you couldn't make as much money as some other guys did. But I suppose as a manager as well, we see this more in other areas of professional sports now. But it sounds like you had sort of a similar um amount of leverage where one agent will look after multiple athletes and he'll be
Yeah.
scheming behind the scenes where he goes, oh, if you don't give athlete 4 what he wants, athletes 1, 2, and 3, 5, and 6 are going to do a big deal and do free agency over here. Was it working to that degree back then where you had that much sort of pull?
I never did that. Wouldn't
Yeah.
do it. I was one of the first managers, the very first that actually did it. You know, that's
That
I took
managed, we're talking about actually
I
managing
actually
MMA
worked it.
fighters.
I mean, I read the contracts. You know, I had a lawyer helping me out and stuff. I had, you know, at one time I probably had 25 guys in the UFC,
Mm,
and they were only doing 6 and 7 shows. You know what I mean? So we were.
yeah.
I mean, I went to. This is another thing I wrote in my book. I went to 61 straight UFCs.
Right.
61. That was over 10 years. I had at least 3 guys, up to 7 guys in every single one of them. I mean, you know, and at one time there were 5 weight classes. I had 4 champs.
Yeah.
Just that damn Liddell. Couldn't get rid of that son of a gun.
See, it's not even Liddell because I mean when you talk about guys like Sean Shirk, again, I'm jogging my memory now, but if I'm not mistaken, so Sean Shirk was already small for his division, but he only really lost to Hughes and GSP, and then later on BJ, which you're talking about like
Oh yeah.
those might be 3 of the greatest 5 fighters of all time. So I mean, what do you do with a guy like that? Could he not? I can't remember how the divisions were set back then, but it seemed like he wouldn't be able to
He
cut any
was
lower
fighting
because
170. He was fighting 170.
mm,
And because they didn't have a 55 really at the time, or maybe they did,
no, well,
but
they
it
brought it
wasn't.
out later, and I think he
Yeah,
lost to BJ at 55 year
yeah,
when
but he
BJ was on
went
his tear.
down and won the title at 55. We had a weird deal in that I had he wanted to fight Matt Hughes, and Matt was my guy.
But they did. That was 43 or something, wasn't it? Or they?
Yeah, well, he wanted to do it before, and I said, I don't let my guys fight each other. At that time, I didn't. It just was. I spend too much time building them up, becoming friends with them, and to knock my own guy off with my own guy. You know, it's
Right.
one thing if they lose, but make someone else do it, not me. And because of that, the UFC wanted that to happen. So even though I was managing him and they knew it, they sent a contract for him to fight Hughes to another manager, and then that manager was able to show it to Sean and say, look, you know, you got to dump money and I got a title fight for you. Well, that, you know, the UFC wasn't, you know, they did a lot of backward behind the scenes. You know, I had so many guys, and you know, Dana didn't like it, and he would go walk through the locker rooms and tell the guys, hey, you know, change your manager and I'll put you in the UFC right away. You know, hey, get rid of your manager, and crap like that. You know, they
Mm,
created a rule just for me: no more than 2 guys per weight class per manager.
right.
It affected absolutely nobody in the world but me,
But you. Okay.
because I had at the time I was trying to get Shirk and Jason Black into the UFC. One was 23 and 1, and the other, no, 23 and 0, I think at the time, and Black was 21 and 0. Couldn't get him in because
Mm.
I already had Matt and Pat, and that they were holding it. They wouldn't let me do it.
When you're managing, like you mentioned that you become friends with these guys, and what I to 2 of them, it happened in very, very different ways. Sylvia popped. He was the first guy to pop for steroids that I remember. I think was it during the Arlovsky period or something like that, and he was
No,
um,
I think
or some sort of tainted thing that put him on the
I think
sidelines for a couple of years.
Barnett Barnett was the first heavyweight to
He was the
pop,
first one, yeah, and I think that saw
and-
him leave the UFC. But I remember I
right?
thought Tim popped and he said, "Look, I was effectively doing this because I was trying to shed fat off my
True.
body. I was
It
just
was
trying to look
true.
better."
It was
Um,
Winstrol.
yeah, whatever. But he seems to have done his time and recovered with it. Sean Shirk, I think, after he won that 155 title, got busted as well, and his name seems to have been removed from like better fighters of all time. Do you remember, or because
Oh,
like with Dillashaw, was Shirk actively on this stuff through most of his career that you remember?
no.
No.
And that's the thing that's so bad is that what I believe him. What he tells me directly, he has no reason to lie to me. I mean, Tim came to me and goes, Monty, I you know, I popped for this stuff. Here's the deal. I'm the one that wrote the press release. I'm the one that was proactive and said, Tim, we're going to get ahead of it. You're going to get out there before they announce it. We're going to admit it. You're going to tell the deal. And that's what we did. I mean, that was all
Mm,
orchestrated on how we going to best handle this. And, but Tim's was a Winstrol, which is not a performance enhancing, but he was embarrassed that he had, like Jen said, he was Harry Bubblegum. That's what he would call him, and everyone else is ripped, and he wanted that.
yeah.
Now Sean, and this is all in the book, so I think I can probably say this stuff. Sean came to me, and he was irate when he tested for this thing. He absolutely denied it. Spent almost all the money he had defending it. He says, and he comes to me and he says, Monty, this, whatever they're saying this is, I never even heard of it before. I did not take this. And then other people said, I talked to New Jersey. New Jersey goes, if that same amount, that little tiny, it was a minuscule amount,
Would have been allowed
we
over there.
we wouldn't count it as popping because that could come from anything, you know. And what ended up happening is the company that was doing the testing, they hired investigators and went and they were not cleaning their stuff.
Right.
After every test, they were required to clean everything, sanitize. They were going right into the next one. So if the test before you had something, you got a trace of it also. Right after the Sean Shirk thing, the UFC fired them as the company that was
Right. Okay.
watching it and went to a new one because they were wrong. They were not doing it right. And I believe Sean told me, he said, look, he goes, have you ever seen his workout? If you
Oh,
go
I've seen
back
his
and
workout
look,
with the tires and everything, but he's
no, just his whole thing. I mean, I've never seen anyone work harder than him and stuff. That being said, he said, he told me, he goes, I'm not saying I've never taken enhancement. He goes, but I haven't since I've been in the UFC.
right.
He goes, and whatever this stuff is, he goes, I've passed every single test, all this stuff. And all of a sudden, out of the middle, this little nano, whatever, one speck of something, he goes, no. He goes, no way. And I believe him. I don't think he did. I
Mm.
really don't. Not during the UFC.
Do you, outside of that, I'm not. I just remember how much blowback there was when it happened because I think, again, I'm trying to jog my memory, but at the time, I feel like the UFC had now taken that step into mainstream, and I feel like he was the first guy that got sort of pegged for it at the time.
Well, because he looked it. I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
that was,
he's a
if
jacked
you look,
fella.
if you, and the fact that he fought it, that
Hmm.
he, you know how that works. I mean, if I say you've done that and you say, no, I didn't, half the people are going to go, yeah, he did.
Yeah, you're
And half are
tainted by
going
it
to say, I
anyway.
believe it.
Yeah.
And so the more he said it and denied it, and then the people who don't like him start running pictures of him flexing and all this, get serious, all that kind of stuff. So he kind of hurt himself there, but I thought he came back okay from it. His body broke down, his knees from wrestling.
That's right. Yeah.
He got to the point he couldn't take somebody down.
Is that why? Because I was going to ask you that. I go, when you look at his later career, he turns into a boxer only, and he doesn't have the
A
reach
box,
on anyone. I
a
go, why?
boxer,
Why is
like
he swinging on these guys when his
a
reach is that?
Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yeah, but
Boxing.
he's missing like 6
He,
inches of
but,
reach on all these
but he was
guys.
actually pretty dang good at it.
He
I
was,
mean,
but he was so far outside
I
the
know,
range.
but that's it. He couldn't. His legs, his knees couldn't do it.
Right.
He
Okay.
kept fighting for the money, but it was that or lay carpet, which is what he was doing.
Which will also screw your knees up as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that was the thing with Sean and Sean. It was funny when he left my management to go fight Matt, and he did it the right way. He called me. He goes, Monty, he goes, dude, I owe you everything. All these fights you've given me. But he goes, winning the UFC title, it's my dream, my goal. And here I got a chance to do it. I got to do it. I'm like, all right, I understand. And what else are you going to do? And then the guy who took over managing him, then once he got him, he played Dana and started demanding more money and all this kind of
because
stuff.
he disappeared after 43 for a number of years.
They cut him. They cut him after he lost. He won 2 rounds. Matt won 3. So the closest Matt had come to, or anyone had come to Matt in a long time.
And then he's gone.
And his only loss, and he was gone. And that's because they couldn't stand the manager and stuff like that. And so he went off and he won. That manager never got him another fight, by the way. And it was good while he was in the UFC, but afterwards didn't care.
And how does that work? Does he still maintain a relationship with Miletich? Is he considered part of the stable after that? Then
he was never really part of.
So he would just come in to train.
He was part of me. I picked him. I don't know that I'm not even sure that he came and trained there. Dave I know did, but I think he trained mainly up in Minneapolis with famous guy Muay Thai. I can see his face. Oh well. Anyway, don't get old. It sucks, man. I struggle. Some things I can remember like it was yesterday, and
that's all right.
I don't remember how I put my socks on. But anyway, so they cut him, and he's out there winning. He wins 9 more in a row, and I want to say I got to look at the thing, but I think he's 31-1.
Yeah.
I mean, what the hell?
Well, those are the only 3 losses that I can think of are Hughes, GSP, and even back then
and those
that was
others
the only
came
one.
later.
Yeah, and those came back
31-1.
Yeah,
and he calls me and he goes, Monty, he goes, can I be a world champion? And I go, yes. I go at 155, not at 70. And he goes, would you manage me? And I go, no. I go, I'm kind of a one-time deal. I mean, I can't have. At that time, I wasn't doing contracts. I'm just doing a handshake with everybody. And if they don't want me to manage them, I let them go. I had so many guys and winning so much. And then I thought more about it, and I thought, you know what? He goes, if you don't manage me, I'm going to retire.
Right.
He goes, you're the only one I want. And so I go, all right, I'll do it. And we went and he won the lightweight title and stuff. But again, he did it the right way. I've had some later on in my management where I've had some guys that treated me pretty bad, and stuff. And
so what does that mean in an area of managing then? Does it just trying to mean like trying to sneak out of their deals behind your back and that sort of thing?
Well, I'm doing handshakes.
Right.
I mean, they can leave anytime they want. But doing stuff like carrying them, getting them fights with my connections, building them up, and getting them back in the UFC, getting them, a big payday. And as soon as they get a 7-figure payday, they go, yeah, I'm doing it myself.
Right. Okay.
That kind of stuff that hurts. When you're especially if you're close to them. And most of these guys that we're talking about
spent
a lot of time with them.
Yeah,
traveled around the world with them, I used to say, I don't have friends, I have fighters. I mean, that's who I hung with.
Okay. So
So,
we'll mention a few more of them. So again, within the stable, we kind of keep circling around these
yeah.
names. Sylvia, Franklin, Horn, and Hughes. We'll talk about Jeremy Horn first. He's another one that I've had the chance to interview and speak with. Everyone who mentioned Jeremy Horn's name holds this level of reverence for him. He seems to be like a mentor and brother to people at the same time. And at the time, they talk about his sort of wizardry with even, I think even Matt Hughes would talk publicly about how much better Jeremy Horn was than he was, even though he's having
On the
multiple
ground.
title defenses. Yeah,
Oh, oh, Jeremy fought Minotauro
that would have ring exhausted.
in WEF, and I mean, those guys afterwards are like, oh, where did you learn your jujitsu? How did They couldn't believe it, that he doesn't have a pedigree of some sort, and he was he was a natural at it, and his record could be so much better than it is. I mean, you've got 2 losses to Arona. The first time they said, well, Arona did more standing up. The next time he fought him, he crushed him standing up. And they said, oh, he got a couple takedowns. And he lost 2 split decisions against Randy Couture. I'm out there at rings again, and they have a show, and they have a fight where 2 guys call it a draw, and one gives it to fighter A. Well, back then, rings fighter A is the winner.
Mm.
And I said, Maida, this isn't how it works. You need to, if it's 2-1, it's a majority draw, and you have to have an overtime. And so he goes, that makes a lot of sense. So we go out there next time, and they do it. After the fight, 2 people have it a draw against Couture. One has Jeremy winning. So they go to overtime, and he loses in overtime because of me. He would have had the win.
Okay.
And I mean, all these guys were, Babalu, arguably in the Denver tournament, could have went either way. All these big time names that he lost to, but he also beat a ton of guys. And most people, if you see a guy with a record of 75-20, okay, something like that.
Well, you don't see those records anymore, but I know exactly what you
No,
mean.
but I mean, if you go back,
Yeah.
because
Well, the only guys I think of records, well, not winning, but the only guys I can think that tracked up those sorts of numbers are guys like Travis Fulton and Shannon Rich are probably the only other 2 guys.
Well, there are others. There are others with 100. Dan Severn had over 100. I've got guys that had like an average guy for me would be like Joe Dirksen, 47-11, something like that. But anyway, most of them you go back, and definitely with Travis Fulton, the losses are the studs. There's all the studs they fought.
Yeah.
Now you go over to the 2000 wins, and it's like those guys all suck. I mean, none of those guys.
Yeah, he could have been having less fights and prepping against better competition
for Travis, he didn't train. He quit training years and years before the end. Right. He just fought, and Travis, once he decided to become, I don't speak ill of the dead here, but once he decided all he wanted to be was the Iron Man and fight more than anyone else, he started coming up with schemes to build his record. So he'd hold an event in a garage. Okay. He'd bring 7 other guys. They would first do a round robin. So he picks up 7 wins.
Yeah.
And then they would, on their records, they would form the tournament. And he'd pick up 3 more wins. So in one day, he gets 10 wins. Well, that's how you get to 300.
Hey, look, I listen.
See, Jeremy got to 100, 90, was got 98 wins, all fighting individual, tough. If you look at his wins, you go down that and you're like, wow. They're all studs, all of them. I mean, he didn't fight the 3-7 guy ever.
Well, this might just be interesting only for you, probably not for anyone else listening. But when I moved over to Australia in 2004, I moved over here to train with Elvis Sinisic, and I ended and so I got my black belt. He was in a gym with another gentleman named Anthony Perosh over here, and I ended up getting my black belt from Anthony. And one of my flatmates, so I'm Canadian, as you can see, and another Canadian came to the gym who was from Winnipeg, and he came out of Joe Dirkson's gym out there
Ah, who was it?
years ago. He only had one fight. His name was Grant Gunther, and he has moved back
Oh,
to Calgary, where he ended up meeting a girl that I went to high school with, and now married and have kids.
isn't it a small
It's
world?
it very much is. It very much
You
is.
know.
But at the time, going back then, like I think Elvis's triangle over Jeremy was huge news back then because he was a
Oh
nobody
my
out of
gosh.
the bottom corner of the earth down here at the time.
Jeremy was ready. If he wins that fight, he fights Tito for the title. And I don't think there's any doubt Jeremy wins that fight. I mean,
Mm,
that's going to go to the ground. And Jeremy was so good. Joe Silva calls me. He goes, "Hey, let's before the Cinesec, let's get Jeremy signed up." I I don't think I'm interested in that. I think I'm gonna wait. I go, I asked for the money. I go, yeah, I think I'm gonna wait. When he beats Elvis, that'll be 6 wins in a row or whatever it is in the UFC. Everyone's gonna scream to fight Tito, and so we'll just do the thing then.
yeah.
And then they kept Jeremy out of the UFC for 3 years for that,
Mm,
because of me, because I
right.
wouldn't sign. And
Well,
and I sent afterwards, I tried to be funny. I'm like, hey, Black Friday sale on Jeremy Horn, you
right.
know, stuff like that. That no response.
Well,
There was
I
you know,
remember when they announced that Liddell would defend against Jeremy, and that came completely out of left field. I remember it's so, and for other people, you got to remember. I only had two media sources. I had Sherdog, or I had the Underground. That was effectively it
yeah,
of where I was getting my news back then. And it was just like, where did he? Because I think he'd been gone for years, and I'm sure I still have a VHS copy of because Jeremy sub Chuck in UFC
yeah,
18 or something like
yeah, one
that
of the earlies.
that I want to say, and I've got
Yeah,
that on VHS with the Be
that was
Kind
one of
rewind stickers still
Ferretti's.
on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and of course he had Shamrock beaten Frank, and in overtime he just left his
Yeah.
leg. I mean, just a little. He was so confident against Elvis, he just hesitated. Normally he'd fight right through that, and he just didn't get through it.
Mm.
And that's the only UFC win Elvis got.
Yeah, that's true.
And I managed Chris Haseman.
Yeah,
For
because
there.
I've got that first Australian no holds barred with who was the Brazilian on it who took it from BTT. Shit, you're talking about forgetting names as well. I'm doing
Yeah,
this.
yeah, I did Haseman. I picked him up from Rings, seeing him over there and stuff, and I put him in my Rings USA show and stuff. And I saw him. Went to Australia a couple times to see him both times.
Okay,
So
yeah.
he's a great guy, really funny guy. And but he goes, Monty, he goes, God damn it. He goes, I'm the best fighter in Australia. He goes, hands down.
Okay.
But he goes, you go and let Jeremy get beat by Elvis. He goes, I would kill Elvis. He
Yeah.
goes, but that's all anyone says. He goes, I'm better than Elvis. He beat Horn.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
goes, why did you do that to me?
Well, I
Because
remember
I think Horn beat Chris.
the first time they were going to bring the UFC out here. I had moved into Sydney, into the city, so I was training with at the gym of an old pancreas fighter by the name of Larry Papadopoulos, if that might
I
play right.
know him. Yeah.
Larry's gym, and Peter Graham was there, the K1 kickboxer, and that's when
Yep.
UFC 110 was coming over the first time they brought over here, and they were going to rematch Haseman and Elvis together. And I think Elvis had
Yes.
permanently blown out his shoulder, so I'd see Haseman working the weights in the morning, and again, it's just odd because like a name that you haven't heard of in a decade is now getting main carded into these events. It was a very interesting time until now. What the UFC's got 600 guys on their roster or something like that
Oh
now.
my God. Yeah. I can't remember him. That show you're talking about, that's the one that where Rothwell got sick and didn't fight.
Is that because that was the big, I remember that was the big coming out party for Cain Velasquez, because Velasquez knocked out Big Nogueira, I think, in the first round, and the
Yeah,
stadium went silently quiet because he hadn't,
yeah.
hadn't turned into Cain Velasquez.
Rothwell wasn't a big. He wasn't like. I mean, he was main card, but he got deathly ill. I don't know what happened, food poisoning or what it was, but they wouldn't clear him.
Mm,
So for a manager, someone like me, I flew all the way over there. I paid my own flights, my own
right.
hotel, my own
Okay.
food. I mean, that was a lot. That's a big loss
Yeah,
for
it is.
me.
Yeah.
I took my wife with and stuff, so we just went up and down the coast. Had a great time, but
It's a
it,
wonderful
it
country.
was. I would have rather gotten 20% of Ben's, you know, of Ben's pay to pay for it. So
We'll talk about a couple more guys, and then we'll get into all these organizations now. So, we talked about Jeremy, um, Matt Hughes. I don't think that I've heard sort of more guys that might have disparaging things to say about as a bully in the gym. And I think I've never actually read the book, but a lot of people go back to that book, his autobiography that he wrote, and says, man, there's a lot of uh, behavior
how
that
do
wouldn't
you
be
write your
tolerated.
own book? How do you write your own book and put in there that you and your brother would do things to underage girls? I
Yeah.
mean, when you're editing your own
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
why would you do that? I mean, there's just a lot of stupid stuff. Now, Matt lived with my family for a year and a half.
Okay.
And if you ask my kids who are now 30, 28, and 26, Matt's a word that starts with an A and ends with whole.
Okay.
You know, he treated them. He was so rough. So if a kid at 10 years old falls and cracks his face open, Matt's like, get up, quick! What are you doing? Good cry. He's a hardcore farmer and tough guy. I mean, his dad treated him that way.
Yeah.
He told me, we would get up in the morning at 4 o'clock, we would farm for 3 hours, come home, go off to school, we would then do wrestling practice after school and come back and finish farming. And we thought everyone did that. He
Yeah.
goes, we didn't, it wasn't until we got out of the house and talked to other people and they're like, you're doing what? And we're like, well, that's all we know. So Matt, when he went on The Ultimate Fighter, I think that's where people figured out what Matt was. I mean, I like Matt. I mean, we get along. He without Matt, I wouldn't have accomplished the things that I did. He was the biggest star that I had, and I had a lot of stars, but he was the guy. But it's a tough dude, man. I mean, when he went on The Ultimate Fighter, a lot of people came out of that thinking less of him. I gotta say, there was one time in The Ultimate Fighter, and of course he's going against Rich. So I got my two guys going against each other, but there was a time that Rich was winning in the beginning, so they had to give a fighter over to Matt. Well, Matt don't want anyone else's fighter. He won't talk to him, won't even look at him, right? So that guy goes in and wins. And when he comes out, it shows him walking back, and he walks into the locker room.
I wouldn't acknowledge him or anything, would he?
No, Matt's playing cards.
Mm.
Won't look at him, won't talk to him after he just got this big win for him. And I was like, all right, that's enough. What the hell, Matt? He goes, stop. He goes, Monty, it didn't happen. He goes, that me playing cards, that was from 2 days earlier.
Oh, it's all edited out, is it? Yeah,
They
right.
edited it all in because that's the narrative they wanted. He goes, when he won, he goes, I picked him up and put him on my shoulders and walked around the ring.
Okay.
He goes, but that's not the story they wanted. He goes, if I learned anything from this, don't believe anything on a reality show. They can make it look like anything. And there also was a reality show, same show, where Sam Hager, one of my other guys, he came off as a thief. They were saying he was stealing stuff. Do you remember that?
I don't remember.
They kept saying he's a thief. They'd interview
No, wait, sorry.
everyone.
Is this the first series?
I think maybe second or third.
So is that Alaskan Sam that we might be talking about?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's series one when they said he was stealing all the
Is that what
UFC
it is?
branded gear. I think is it was the what they were
Yeah.
putting up on him.
And the reality is they had tubs of it sitting there and they said, take what you guys want.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. But they made it look like he was stealing it. And they found one person to say, yeah, I think he is stealing it. And they built him into the thief. And he's like, it's so stupid. He goes, one of the guys says, hey, I think that's my shirt. And he goes, I told him there's 20 more in the thing. I just pulled it out of there. And so anyway, just for your reality, but that's where Matt really lost some of his popularity.
When with Matt as well, I think he has a trilogy with GSP, and I remember in the first fight GSP was sort of still coming up. I think some people would have potentially given it to GSP, but Matt was still generally the favorite. I think he gets that arm bar off in the last second of the first round or something. When they rematch, I remember the push that GSP had. It was like it's going to be impossible for Matt Hughes to win this second fight. Were you feeling that same sort of pressure, or into that second fight? What were you sort of feeling? What was the environment that you felt going into that?
Well, we said the same thing when he fought him the first time. We knew GSP already. We were going to Montreal, and I was taking fighters up there to
they had TKO. Was it UCC original TKO and then UCC?
Yeah, UCC. I even co-promoted some events with Steph, and so we knew. We saw his first fight. I mean, so we know all these guys. We actually, real quick, we're up there, and Matt came up with and all at the corner guys, and we decided. I called Steph over and I said, "Look, let's pull a joke on GSP. He's maybe 5-0 then. You need to go over and tell him the UFC just called. They want him, but they need him to fight Matt because Matt is his hero." Okay. So he goes over and tells him, and he's like, "What?" And he's all lost for words. And so we walk away, and then we have Matt sneak up on him and just start going, "You're fighting me. You're going to fight." He goes, "Oh, Matt, I did not know. They call me. I don't know." And then we all start laughing. And he's like, What? And Steph goes, "We're just joking with you." And he goes, "Oh, I got to call my parents," because he called them and told them. Well, then, of course, it becomes reality.
It does, yeah.
And we said when Matt fought him the first time, I said, "How do you feel about it?" And he goes, "How do you feel about it?" And I said, "If you're going to fight him now. Get him now. He's young, still learning. Don't get him 3 years from now." And he goes, "I agree with you." And we got him the first one, and we still thought maybe Matt's the way he felt about Matt, and he put him on a pedestal, and maybe give him too much respect.
You had him already.
Yeah. So we might be able to get him the second one. The third one, there was no doubt. By that time, Matt couldn't even take him down.
I think by that time, not only that, I think I can't remember when. Maybe you have an insight into why, but Matt seemed to later in the career decide to go from an orthodox to a southpaw fighter, and I could never figure out why he made that transition so late in the career.
He different feet forward for wrestling than boxing.
So he was trying to just go back to a pure wrestling base. Oh, he wanted to box, right? Okay.
He wanted to box. I mean, the greatest thing that Matt, I mean, when Matt was taught jiu-jitsu, I mean, he put everything into jiu-jitsu. Him and Horn, those guys would roll for a friggin' hour. And then if God forbid Jeremy catch Matt and tap him with an hour to go, because Matt is, I mean, he is 400%. He is going to tap Jeremy before he leaves, because they were very even, and it was a war, and that's just his mentality. So when he decided he wanted to box, I thought, you know what, he's so strong. I mean, sick strong. He hit really hard. but he just couldn't. He just couldn't put it all together
Hmm.
to box with the better guys. He just couldn't do it.
And
You
what
know.
did you think then as well? Because I guess, well, this fight actually I think came before the second GSP fight, but the super fight or the move up from BJ Penn were, a really surprisingly short match. I think he ended up clipping Matt and then hopped on his back. What
Yeah.
I you know if they rematched as they did, I had anticipated the match would have gone the second way that it did, where Matt can sort of lay out on BJ. So were you as surprised by how quickly the outcome of that match was determined the first time around?
Well, um, one mistake I think that Matt made, uh, a third of his way through his career in UFC, is he quit wrestling.
Mm.
He just didn't want to wrestle anymore. He wanted to learn to strike, and he wanted to learn jujitsu, and he kind of got away from wrestling. And so all of a sudden, he's not able to take these guys down. He can't. I mean, Matt, that's his base.
Yeah.
All else fails, he takes him down. You know, and if he could just get crossbody or get half guard, he'll pound you from
Mm.
there. But it was funny how he kind of all of a sudden when you take that out of his arsenal, now you have a mediocre striker and a jujitsu guy who can't get someone to the ground,
Yeah.
and it left him, from for a long time. I couldn't find anyone that would even give him a go, and at the end, I couldn't find anyone he could beat
Well,
in
that's
the
what's so
UFC.
so curious to me that later on in the career, it's like he's fighting guys like Hoist and Henzo, and I'm like, these guys are 10 years gone by now.
But a lot of that, Matt and Dana had a really good relationship. They were
Mm.
close, they're tight, and I think that was a lot of it was Dana trying to,
Find something for him.
yeah,
Mm.
keep him around. He was a big draw still, good on pay per view, good on tickets. He was trying to keep him around.
It's curious. In as I mentioned before, I had the chance to speak with you today. I checked out some of the other podcasts, and what you had said is very similar to the dominance that John Jones has, where you were saying that he would come to the gym 2 weeks before a title fight and just kind of spar and then go in there and absolutely dominate guys, which sounds very much like John Jones, where other guys are in there 3 times a day, five
Yeah.
times a week to be average fighters.
When Matt had that, when he beats Newton with the double slam
Yeah.
thing, um, they decided to make that a quick rematch, and we had 2 months, so I'm not worried about it. Matt doesn't train much anyway. It takes him a week, and it's like he's been training 3 months. I mean, his body comes around. When he would show up to the gym, everyone would go, "Matt just got here. Everyone got to get in now, because
He'll be gone in
this
an
is our
hour.
it's our chance." But because by the end of the week, he's going to kill us again,
All right.
and
Okay.
so everyone would take advantage. But we go all the way down to 2 weeks before the Newton fight, and I just can't. Yeah, I'm beside myself. I don't understand, and so I call him, and he answers, and you can hear in the background this. I go, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, we're putting the roof, on out here, with Mark and blah blah." I go, "Jesus!" I go, "Matt, do you think Carlos is roofing?" And he laughs and he goes, "Monty, relax." He goes, "Look, last time I didn't know what I was getting into." He goes, "Now I do." He goes, "Trust me, this is a no brainer." And he didn't show up until 2 days before they flew out,
Right.
um, to the thing, and he just annihilated him.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you? That, unfortunately, that feeds the
Ego
thought that
of
I don't have to train,
yeah.
and that became, a little bit of a problem.
He I don't remember. It's some years ago now. He was involved in close to a deadly accident. I think where his truck got hit by a train, and he had virtually,
Yeah.
I think, had to relearn how to walk and speak. How is he going these days?
Still a struggle. You know, he took the way everyone tells me, and I haven't seen him in a while, but I've seen him, I've seen him at my shows. He'll show up and we'll talk, but um, he hears what you say and he knows what he wants to tell you, but it takes time to generate that response. And it's like, don't ask Matt, we ain't got time,
Right.
to do this. I'll say this. I don't think there may be a handful of people in the world who could have survived that crash.
Mm,
I mean, you got to have a neck this big and shoulders and everything, because it was the head thing. There's no broken bones or nothing. It was
yeah.
all the snapping of the head that put him in the coma and all that stuff. And to come back from that at all
Mm.
is pretty dang amazing. It really is.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think they said the same thing about Kevin Randleman at some point, that he went through a huge car accident. It was pretty much his wrestler's neck that kind of saved him uh,
Yeah.
well,
I mean,
he's passed now, but
he's put together different, different than
is
everyone else.
is a different was a different human being, wasn't he? Okay.
Yeah. Well, real quick, I'll tell you a good Matt story. For a while there, I was taking Matt before. He's been in the UFC now and stuff, but I'd take him around with me to radio stations when I'm promoting my events.
Right.
And we bring in Matt, and quite often the DJs would go, they expected someone who looked like Tim Sylvia, bigger than life, a monster, a guy that you would say, whoa, I would not touch that guy. Matt's a 5'9", 180-pound average guy.
Mm.
And so the one time in Decatur, the guy whispered to me, he goes, man, I really thought Matt would be bigger. And I said, I'll tell you what, here's what we're going to do. After the break, call out, get 3 200 to 250-pound guys in here, and we're going to do a tug of war. And we brought these 3 guys, came in, big, muscular. We took one of those orange extension wires, they're you pull them and they turn yellow, when you start, I'm talking about big electrical wires.
Yeah.
And Matt wrapped it around his wrist, and those 3 guys all got a hold, and they couldn't move him. And he slowly starts pulling them in, and it all stopped. And I looked, and the one guy had put his foot on the desk. And I go, come on, dude, you're 3-1.
Play
And
fair.
when he took
Yeah.
that out, Matt just yanked him right over to him. 3 200-pound dudes. And the DJ was like, no, that was impressive. He was so strong.
I'd like to move on and talk about Tim a little bit more, because he's sort of out of the crew. Like it sort of feels like Jens Pulver was forgotten about for a while, but now he's kind of come back into the collective memory. But from that sort of crew, it feels like Tim probably didn't get the recognition that he deserved, probably out of all of those guys. What I remember in particular is when Tim won the belt, Randy Couture had already moved down to light heavyweight. I think he then had dropped I think the second and third fights to Liddell, and I think it was due to Sylvia winning the heavyweight title. Couture had previously done mat time with him, and it was solely because Tim had won the heavyweight title that Couture came back up to challenge for it, based on their training experience. I'm sure you would have been around at that time, sorting out all the contracts. So hearing that and kind of probably having been there during those times, what's sort of going through your head now when you go, oh shit, he's not wrong?
Well, to start off, when Tim arrived at Miletich, he was a 6'8", 350-pound sloth. I mean, he wasn't in shape. He had just so far to go, and all the people there were saying, why do you even have this guy here? And Pat would say, he never quits, he never stops. He pukes every day, but he is not stopping. And so Pat actually, he and Tony Fricklin came to me and said, would you manage us? And I'm like, no, I just don't. I got too many guys.
Hmm.
And we ended up, it's a long story how we end up, I ended up taking him on. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this guy? So I said, you know what? I'm just going to start sticking him in shows. His first fight for me was against Ben Rothwell. I mean, I didn't take it easy. He beats Ben. And I go, not bad. We put him in a 4-man and an 8-man tournament in Utah, part of a big tournament. He wins 3, and now he goes like 7-0. Then he goes to Hawaii for the 16-man final and wins 4 in a row. Now he's 11-0. Well, Joe Silva's been calling me, and I'm like, no, I'm not. He's not there, man. He's just not there yet. But that tournament in Hawaii where he stopped, he beat Mike Whitehead.
Really? Yeah. Okay.
Twice in the first round and the final because he came in as an alternate. He beat who were the other guy that was.
So is this Rumble on the Rock then?
No. How dare you? No, this is TJ Thompson in my show where
Right.
we did.
Okay.
The thing is,
because I was going to say Cabbage Carrera is sort of, but I can't even remember if Sylvia meets Cabbage in the UFC.
No, yes, he's supposed to meet Cabbage there. Cabbage beat Travis View, and then TJ tells Cabbage, "Look, you're not going to beat Tim Sylvia, and right now you're as valuable to me as you've ever been. You just broke your hand." And so it pulled him out of the tournament.
Gotcha.
And but anyway, so after the tournament's over, Sylvia goes, "How about now?" And I said, who are you thinking? And he said, "Is there someone you want?" And I go, "Cabbage. I'd like to do the fight we were going to fight." He goes, "Okay." So he comes in, beats Cabbage, and he's now like 11-12-0. And Tim and Joe calls me and he goes, "You're not going to believe this. You're going to think I'm crazy." Joe and I really got along. And he goes, "What about Tim for the world title?" And I go, "Shut up." I go, and I'm like, "Well, wait a minute. It's Rico." "Oh, that's a good matchup for us." I mean, that's a really good matchup for us. Rico's not going to take Tim down.
Yeah.
And Rico sure as hell ain't going to stand with him. I go, "I like that fight." So we do it. And of course, then Tim knocks him out. But the contract I put together had a stipulation in there that Tim didn't have to fight Pedro Hizzo for the first year after he won the title. Because I'm thinking, because Dana and I didn't get along, I'm thinking, how's Dana going to screw me over on this? He wins the title. Oh, then he's going to throw him against, Pedro, who was at that time incredible striker.
I just rewatched Couture Hizzo 1 the other day because I was going, is this fight as good as I remember it being?
It's great.
They don't even get out of the first round before they're both sitting in their chair like we're done.
That's why they redid it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why Miletich had to give up his title. Miletich was supposed to fight a rematch with Newton. Pat defended it 6 times. Newton gets him on, and he's winning. He's beating Newton, and he gets caught in that head crank.
That bulldog choke against the cage. Yeah.
And so they said, go, beat a decent guy, and you'll get your rematch. So he goes out and he knocks out Shoni Carter, who nobody knocked him out. That was a really good big win. And so he's supposed to get his rematch. Well, the problem is the first time they all fought, it was Couture and Hizzo and Newton and Miletich.
Yeah.
Well, now they had already told Couture and Hizzo were redoing it. So if they gave Pat the rematch, it'd be the exact same card.
Right. Okay.
And they go, we can't do that.
And you're only running 6 cards a year back then or something.
Yeah. And they go, and we can't not do Newton. His contract's going to expire. He's got to get a fight.
That's Hughes then that steps in then.
They offered it to Hughes. Hughes says, no, it's Pat's fight.
Right.
And after a while, I talked to them all, and Pat does a incredibly unselfish thing and says, "You know what? I promised you I was going to make you a world champion. This is it. I want you to take the fight. Because if you don't take the fight, they're going to give it to someone else.
Yeah, yeah. This is
We'll keep
England?
it in
Is
the
this is
gym.
this Royal Albert Hall that I'm thinking of? This really do the fight in England?
No, no, this is the first Newton. It was in Vegas.
Vegas, okay.
You want to
So,
know why? You want to know why I know it? A little short one, real quick.
of course, yeah, yeah, that's why we're here.
They're ready to fight and stuff, and the cameraman comes over to me and says, "Hey, I see you're sitting. I'm in the front, very first row of the bleacher. There." He goes, "If Matt wins, I'm going to turn to you and get your celebration." Well, we're in Vegas, and my wife is very pretty, believe it or not, because of me. But I said, "Missy, no one wears a bra in Vegas. I mean, nobody. Why you got to be so conservative?" Once in a lifetime, she decides, okay, I'll do it. So we go out. Matt's declared the winner. The guy zooms over to us, and we're jumping up in the air, and it goes from me, whoop, right to my
Nice
to my
rack.
wife, and all of a sudden, her phone starts beeping. Beep, nice boobs. Beep, nice rack. Everyone watching doing that. Never again. That was my
Right.
one chance. Anyway, that's how I know it was Vegas.
So what I was asking about though
Oops.
was Randy Couture starts doing interviews saying, I know that I can beat Tim Sylvia. I've spent years with him in the wrestling room. I can do this. And I think because I think that's Tim's first title defense, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I don't think so.
No?
No, he beat Munson, um,
Okay, yeah, that's right.
other guys. I thought it was actually they were running out of people. Yeah,
Or
it
whatever it
wasn't
was,
not
but
a,
I remember when he starts talking about this publicly, and I go, well, he's very he's coming out of retirement saying that he's got the experience in the room to do it. And what I was saying was, how did this make you guys feel? Because I remember this coming out publicly in the interviews. He's like, I can best him in the room, and that's why I'm coming back.
I I didn't give Randy a chance in hell.
Yeah.
No, I mean you Randy. I mean we got great wrestlers in the room. It's so hard to take Tim down. Now Randy knows the secret, and the secret is angles, and you come straight at the bull. It's not going to work. And most guys like Munson kept trying doing that, and he just gets stuffed, and all that weight come down on you. So he did know that, but he didn't win because of his wrestling. We didn't think. Boy, I mean, Tim was on a roll. He's got such a reach advantage. Randy does get hit a lot. I really was confident in Tim, and then that first overhand right that could coach her through.
Yeah.
Tim doesn't remember anything after that. Nothing.
Right.
He's sitting in the on the thing. It's the fourth round, and he goes, "Okay, round two." Like, no, it's the fourth round. No, round two.
Right.
I mean, he doesn't that he was by all, he is knocked out. He does not know who he is, where he is. So how he lasted 4 more rounds with like that, I give him credit and stuff. But nope, that all the talking and stuff like that. It's one thing to do it like Randy does it, which is just kind of we know Randy's a good guy. We know he's being confident. It's different than like McGregor does it.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a different deal where that gets you upset. And so we thought, yeah, if Randy wants to do it, giving up 50 pounds, yeah, let's do it. And that was one of the that and the Elvis, two of my bigger shockers of losing.
And so what then becomes of the situation? Because Tim, and again, I've got my time frames wrong. I'm trying to think of Sylvia. I remember he just sprawls out on Munson. I remember he gets He gets caught in the guillotine by Nogueira on an interim fight, and then he ends up in Affliction.
He head kicks Teligman and knocks him out.
That's right, because Teligman again is another one that sort of seemed to come out of the blue to fight Sylvia, because he had been gone for a few years before coming back
Yeah.
in. That's right, I remember that lead front kick, I think, if I'm not, or switch kick.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
but at that time, Tim was, I mean, for a 6'8" dude, what other guys that size are head kicking
yeah.
and stuff. I mean, he was a different animal then. He became, it's almost like what they do with Larry Holmes, where they say, yeah, Holmes was great, but he came up in a time where there wasn't anybody,
Mm.
and you can always argue that, I guess, but Tim put people away,
Mm.
and I think he'd have done really well. He dominated Nogueira until Nogueira finally got him to the ground and got on top of him. That's remember he won the first 2 rounds. All he had to do was survive the third.
I think
The,
I think
yeah,
the only
my
fight that was
God.
a bit boring with Tim is the Osorio Silva fight. I think they were clinching on the cage for 3 rounds or something, if I'm not mistaken. If that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, there were a couple Arlovskis also in there, but most of those ended in knockouts.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
although the last time he fought him, it went 25 minutes of just stand up, and Tim won the decision, but he didn't win any fans with that one.
How do you feel, just as a segment, because we are talking about how apparently Jeremy Horn is still taking fights, but on the flip side, how do you feel about Arlovsky still being in the UFC?
It's amazing. It's amazing. And he put together a streak of
Like three or
3 or 4
yeah,
wins
only a
every
couple years
time.
ago. Yeah.
Every time you think he's finished, he'd get a big win and
Mm,
he'd stick around. And there was several guys that managed to do that in UFC, that this is it, his last fight, and then he gets an upset knockout and he's back again.
yeah, yeah.
And Arlovsky certainly was the master of that.
How did that? Because someone who I guess followed that path, I've always been a massive Robbie Lawler fan. He is sort of like the exact style of fighter that I'm like, this is fun to watch. And I guess with your boxing experience, he's not worried about get taken down, so he will box from the inside, which is really, really rare to see out of a fighter who will sprawl and brawl to get back to those leaping hooks. But I'm segueing, but he left the UFC and he like disappeared through all these other promotions for what, 10, maybe 15 years. Pops
Well,
up.
not quite that much.
It was not,
Like about seven.
maybe I'm
Seven.
forgetting, but it seemed like a long time. Seemed like a very, very long time. Comes back into the UFC, wins the belt. I think the Lawler story, in my opinion, almost feels almost the closest thing that we've got to like this almost like Cinderella Man type story of a guy who went through a period of some ups and downs and a run of losses to come back and win a title. I've always been a massive fan of his style. What was sort of happening? Because were you still managing through all those other periods, including Strikeforce as well with him?
Of course, I managed him for eight 8 or 9 straight years. He came to me in his pickup truck when the UFC dropped him the first time, and begged me to manage him. He goes, I'm 20 years old and I'm finished. And so I took him through Elite XC. I took him through Icon Sports with TJ. TJ is one of my best friends. And we rebuilt him into something, and then got him in with Strikeforce. And I got him a contract with Strikeforce that was better than anyone in the UFC was getting, except the champ.
Can you tell
I
me what
mean,
that means when you say we rebuilt him? What does that mean?
well, he was done. He lost in the UFC. They cut him, and no one wanted to fight him. How are you going to get him fights? I mean, he's done.
Mm.
And I called people that I had relationships with and said, hey, we help me rebuild him, get him some wins, get some stuff going, and then I was able to, I made a really good deal with Strikeforce, where Strikeforce didn't think he was any good. And I said, fine, then you won't mind doing this. if he ever fights for your title, you know, which obviously he won't because he's terrible, then he goes to 100 plus 50. If he wins the title, he goes to 150 plus 150. And if he wins the next one, he goes to 200 and 200. And they go, that's a lot of money. And I go, what does it matter? He's terrible. He's never going to get that. We're just sticking it in there. Well, you know, a year later, he's their champ and they're paying him a god awful amount of money. And those are the kind of contracts. No one else did those.
And
No,
just
no
just
one.
to confirm, when
I
you
did
say
those.
Strike Force said this, do you mean Scott Coker?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
Well, there was no, in his defense, there was no reason to think he was any good.
yeah, fair enough.
He kept he would lose at times. It didn't make any difference. You know, he'd have fights where he quit throwing.
Yeah.
So that being said, Lawler's like the biggest asshole I've ever met.
Is he really? Okay.
I hate him. I mean, I hate him.
Right.
The only guy I've ever managed that I can't stand. I won't talk to him. If I could run him over, I'd run him over.
Right.
Piece of shit.
Okay. How
Well,
come?
you might guess he might have screwed me over.
Okay. What happened?
I spend 8 years building him back up. I get him into the UFC, get him his contract, big contract, get him a world title fight, and he cuts me.
Right.
Right then. How the hell? How do you do that?
And so what do you think? Yeah.
Here's the other thing. We both lived in Bettendorf. He was my best friend. We hung out together. We went to movies. We went and got wings together. We hung out. We were best friends.
So you don't mean he's been a bad person historically. You mean he was all right up until that point.
Yeah. And then he just turned out to be whatever he is. The fact that after that he lost like 6 out of 7 was so good. So good. Every time I'd start to think about him, I had the meme of Tyrone Woodley jacking his face on the cage.
Yeah, right.
And I'd bring that up, make me feel better. And then after he did it to me, he did it to Dan Lambert. Dan Lambert feels exactly the same way.
Really?
About it. He's just an unloyal, greedy, selfish. I wish I'd have never taken him on. I wish way back when he came asking for help that I would say, get out of here.
So what happened then? Because
other than that,
because that sounds like similar shades too. Because I remember, or again, I'm trying to jog my memory, but it seemed like part of the Miletich camp falling apart or falling away was that Matt and Robbie decided to go create the Hit team. Do I have this correct? That they decided to walk away. Hit Squad, yeah.
Yeah, you know, it was one of those things too where Pat had retired, and Pat's training, the majority of his training was saying, hey guys, train, follow me, do what I do, you'll become a killer. And it's right. If anyone that could keep up with him became killers. But once he got married, had kids, he didn't want to train 3 times a day.
Yeah.
But the other fighters did. And so, Jeremy went off to Utah. That was a big loss. He was the ground game there. He was the ground game. And then Matt just wanted to go back to Illinois, closer to home. And he started his own. I mean, this all happened. Pat was under somebody too when he wanted to start his own gym. I mean, it's no surprise. It's the way this thing works.
Yeah.
But that definitely reduced the star power. We still had Jens. We still had Tim. We had Drew McFedries. And a lot more that I'm forgetting. Spencer Fisher. There were just so many good guys.
Yeah.
And so it was still formidable, but it wasn't the it wasn't the intimidating team that we had when, say, Spencer Fisher is fighting, and the opponent looks up, and there's Pat Miletich, Matt Hughes, and Jeremy Horn in his corner.
Yeah, yeah.
A little intimidating. And he looks at his guys. Oh shit, you know.
I think
So
I've still got pages of questions for you. I think we might have to look at doing a part 2 of this as opposed to trying to run the
same thing
clock
that
out on
happened
this.
with Lights Out. Same thing.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I'll ask you a couple questions before we wrap it up, and then we'll see if we might be able to look at doing a second part of this. At what point in time do you remember early on? So we're talking SCG era UFC, not when they get bought out by Zuffa, but there's kind of two major periods. It's like the interest in the sport starts to wane around what? Maybe around UFC 10, approximately, thereabouts. That's when John McCain starts getting into the conversation. And then when it virtually goes into bankruptcy and being bought out by Zuffa, I'd sort of classify as those more like the tail end. Is there a particular pinpoint that you remember that interest was starting to wane in it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think of all the things that Meyerowitz and those guys did right, um, in promoting the thing, it backfired. You know, the 2 men enter, 1 man leaves, the world's deadliest sport, and it got all
The
of
shock
the
value loses after a
yeah,
while. Mm.
it got all the politicians, you know, saying what they're saying it right there,
Mm.
you know. So Pat and I remember Pat going on TV to argue that it wasn't the most dangerous, and the guy goes, "You guys don't even have a referee," and Pat goes, "We have a referee." He goes, "You've," and it was like a congressman. He
Yeah.
goes, "You've never seen it,"
Mm.
and the guy goes, "I don't have to smell shit to know what it's to know it stinks."
Yeah.
So he's on there arguing and he's never seen it. I mean, that's, you know, stupid. But yeah, it was, I don't know that it was waning. It just wasn't getting, um, they needed new stars. It was the same when those first 10, 15, it was Tank Abbott's in every one, you know,
Mm.
the same guys are in it. It's the same guys over and over. They're all heavyweights. And I was still interested, but it wasn't like it was, you know, when Peretti got him on board and decided to start doing these weight classes. Boy, it opened up. You know, I mean, you think of some of the most famous boxers, a Leonard, a Hagler, not heavyweights. I mean, it opened it up to all kinds of stars,
Mm.
and I think that's where it started to turn around. And then, thank goodness, Zuffa had deep pockets, and they were able to lose a boatload of money, you
Did
know,
you
before they.
were you already getting wind of it? Because they, I think
Oh,
for fans of it, we know the Ultimate Fighter, that first one changed everything, but they were saying they were losing millions a year. Was that being
41
relayed?
million they were behind or
Right.
something
Was
like
that
that.
being relayed to you? Like, hey guys, we're probably
We
down
knew,
to our
yeah,
last 4 shows or something like that.
yeah. Well, no, they said they did a pay-per-view, and they told, I've been told this by people who would know, they told the pay-per-view, this is it, last show, we're done.
Right.
And then after that phone call, you got Spike, it was Spike TV that called and took the Ultimate Fighter.
It was literally like, this is the end. This is the last one. And
Done.
then, right.
Uh,
Yeah, no kidding.
that Spike TV saved us.
Wow.
And
I think that's, sorry.
no, I mean, when you look back at it, that's because they got a pretty, you know, those TV guys pay pretty good.
Mm.
So there was enough money to, you know, 40 million is not, you know, they were able to recover, I think, with the TV deal.
Well, look, I don't have $40 million, but maybe that's just me.
Me neither.
So.
I haven't looked lately, but
All right, look, I think that's a good place to wrap up. But if you're happy to do, I mean, I honestly, I haven't even gotten through half of the stuff I think I wanted to go through. But if you're happy to speak with me again at some point in the
imagine
coming
how good
weeks,
my book is when you start promoting it next time.
I'm happy to, more than happy to. So, do we have an indicative time frame on this book for you?
Well, during the pandemic, I really was able to work on it, and I wrote 25 chapters.
Okay.
And it's chronological. Starts with my phone call from about Pat going to Chicago, and I've got a handful of things. I've struggled with my Rich Franklin chapter,
Mhm.
only because I'm very close to him, and
How do you be
there's just
honest without being offensive almost in some areas, or?
no, not that, because he was great. It's I just want to do it justice, you
Right.
know. Um, Robbie won't like my book.
Yeah.
He won't like that chapter. I guarantee
Mm.
it. He will not like that chapter. But yeah, it all my champions I did a chapter on, or close to one. I talk about different things going to Japan, WEF. Um, remember, I was CEO of M1 Global, so I
Part two.
had yeah.
Part
I'm
two.
just saying, all
Fedor, the
this stuff.
mobsters, Yakuza, all that stuff.
Yeah, and so I got through those chapters, and what I've started now, we're now doing the final edits, chapter by chapter. So um, when as a writer, I like to go back. I now go back and change two words. Oh,
Yeah.
change another word. You know, you got to stop somewhere. Someone's got to stop me.
Yeah.
So we put a deadline on it. I finished chapter 1. I cannot go back. Chapter 2 cannot go back. It's done. And I'm done through 15 chapters. So tonight, I think Hughes's chapter is tonight. I'm going to try to get through it and move along. I've got 2 or 3 chapters still to write, and 10 more chapters to edit. And I'm done. So I think before New Year's, it'll be
Really?
done.
Okay.
I
So
think
do you
so.
have you arranged distribution and all of that for this as well?
Um, I've been working with Keith Mills, a photographer, pretty famous photographer,
Mhm.
and he's done like 6 books.
Okay.
And he did it through Amazon. He self-published, and I was always amazed how fast he was able to. He knew that part of it,
All right.
and so what I didn't know, I didn't think when I paired up with him, he's got photos of every major thing I'm talking about,
Yeah, yeah.
and so our pictures are going to be as good as the writing.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe not as good as my writing, but as good as so. But so that's what we're doing. We're trying to put it together. We'll self-publish, and then I'll order a couple hundred books to start, but I will send 10 books out to publishing companies and say, would you be interested in
Right.
taking it from here? I'm hoping to get on Joe Rogan.
Mm.
I mean, I know him pretty well, and he loves that old stuff.
Well,
You know,
I'm glad I got you first. I feel that guy has so much output where it's like you might want to talk to someone and he's doing, 7 episodes a week, but we'll do that in part 2 because as I said before we actually started recording, it to guys like you and me, and you've been around the scene longer, it is fascinating to see, I think, what a commentator from UFC 13 become the largest media personality on planet Earth at the moment. It's I don't know what to say about it.
how about people thinking, look at Bruce Buffer. When he started out, he was Michael's brother.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
no one thought, what a great announcer. Now he's everywhere.
yeah.
Guy's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a good chapter on him in there too.
I've heard he parties
But
hard. That's the reputation that I've heard about him.
I we went. One of the things we can talk about is probably one of my best chapters in the book is Warriors War, where we went
Okay.
to Kuwait
All
and
right.
stuff, and we had nothing to do. I mean, it was desert as far as you could see, and like an unlimited number of cats running around. They can't
Right.
kill cats.
Okay.
So we Big John, Elaine, Bruce, me, we all sat in the lobby of the hotel for almost a week
Yeah.
and just talked and told stories and stuff like that. So good stuff there.
We'll do a part 2 of that definitely
All right.
as we move this through. Thanks for your time because it's much later there. I normally do these in the middle of my work week
11.
right here. So
I don't go
I'm
to
glad.
bed till 3 in the morning,
Yeah, right. Okay. I don't go to bed
ever.
that late, but all right.
Sometimes last night, 6. If I'm working on the book, 7.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes I'll skip it. I'll skip a sleep to
Okay.
do it.
Yeah.
Remember, I was a newspaper writer before this.
Yeah.
So I would have to go in at 7 a.m. to be with the reporters.
Yeah.
Then I would have to be there till 2 in the morning because I was the editor when the paper came out to check for any last things. And then I go home. So I've been a 3 to 5 hour sleeper
Right.
my whole life.
So are you still, if you have a background as an editor, then when you finish your book, are you still going to get a second proofreader or editor just to put a
No,
fresh set of eyes on it? No, you just finish
no.
it off yourself. Yeah.
It's all I did for 18 years is edit copy
Yeah.
and stuff. Now I've sent chapters out to lots of different people and said, let me know what you think and stuff like that. And I mean, I know the MMA people are going to love it, especially the older guys.
Mm.
Because there's stuff in there. Big John McCarthy knows everything, but I
Yeah.
got shit in my book he don't know,
Who,
and stuff like that.
whose book do you think? Because I haven't had a chance to get around to them, but I know in the last few years both Peretti and Art Davie have put out books, and what's the book to read out of those ones that you think?
Are we on the air?
Yes, we are. You can tell me afterwards. You can well, you're American. You can plead the fifth and then tell me afterwards if you wish.
um, it all depends on. They have totally different stories. I mean, Art's telling how it started from the ashes, right? I mean, from the very beginning. I mean, that to me is interesting.
Who
Um,
started it in your opinion? Because Art Davie, I believe, is certain that he did it. Is it Horian Gracie is certain that it's his baby. Who who started the
well, I think
use?
it was the collaboration of Meyerowitz and them. I think,
Meyerowitz as well says that's right. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think it is the total thing. But I wasn't there then, but I've
Mm,
always been. I mean, Art's been given a lot of credit,
yeah.
and he's a nice guy. So I just always assume it's him.
Okay. Look, I think I've already said we'll do a part 2. So instead of kind of just dragging this out further, I reckon we have a nice clean cut.
Yep,
I'll hit stop recording. You can give me these little insider tidbits of information, and then we'll go back to air in a few weeks with a part 2.
sounds good.
All right, excellent. Monty Cox, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks.